I was like, what were you doing with my drapes? The drapes that were hanging in the apartment. I never got the answer to that. Hi, this is Carrie from Sky Properties, and today we're going to talk about recovering from your first big failure. So my first big failure was a big one. It was a failure that I thought was the end of my company. I thought that I would never recover from it. I took on a client that brought in 2,500 units in the worst part of town, but they were gang-ridden buildings, and they wanted to make me a part owner in them if I could get them cleared out. The idea was to rehab them and up the rents. So these buildings were so bad that I had to hire private security and also make friends with the local PD who actually wanted nothing to do with these buildings. These men and women would hold my vendors hostage for money in the driveway. And one of them even had a gun pointed at them. And they were told to give them money or not be allowed entrance into the building for service. And these buildings were in the worst possible shape you could imagine. I'll give you an example that still freaks me out to this day. We were walking around an apartment, and it had this weird smell, and it had sawdust about knee high all the way around the apartment, but there were trails through it. I later learned that that was not sawdust. Those were roach bodies, dead roach bodies, and they were just dried up and they were stacked. Was it occupied, you ask? Why, yes, it was. Let's just say that I cleared them out a little too fast and their financing was not done exactly right. And let's just say that I've personally spoken to Lehman Brothers about their loans. And I never get involved in people's financing, but they were financed by two of the biggest lenders in the country in 2007, and those two lenders failed. There's been movies made about it. And in the meantime, my company got caught up in that failure. I had over 100 employees at the time, which I hired to service these buildings and fix them. Let's just say that I had everything into these buildings and then some. So there's a lot of details that go into it. There were even some possible death threats. I had millions of dollars tied up in my trust accounts, and the people that saw this failing and saw it going wrong wanted that money back. But I had about $2 million in vendor bills, and I was refusing to give them their money out of their trust accounts until I was allowed to pay my vendor bills. And what happened was, because these people had so much power, they walked into my bank and they froze my accounts, which is absolutely unheard of when it comes to trust accounts. It was a devastating hit because, one, I'd put so much pride into fixing these buildings. I personally walked these buildings. I encouraged employees. I brought them lunch. I literally had boots on the ground at every single one of these buildings, personally guaranteeing that they succeeded. I think the hardest part really was letting go of the people. I was later to learn that many people lost their buildings, lost their jobs, lost their financing in the big crash of 2007, but I didn't know that yet. I thought it was just me when it really wasn't just me. Everyone's always telling you, oh, just pick yourself up by the bootstraps. And it just made me so angry. And what really sucked is in the end, they were all completely right, 100% right. So I started off with a massive layoff. That was the first step. I then hired an attorney on the night before Thanksgiving. Getting legal advice when something like this happens is very important. We then had to address the fact that they had basically frozen all my trust accounts. There were 25 of them, holding various amounts of money. All my vendors are small vendors. I use small vendors because I get better service and I get a better price. And I knew that some of them were going to be substantially hurt. So I did get all my vendors paid, and I got all my payroll paid on time. They released a section of the money so that that payroll could be met for that time period before I could lay everyone off.